So I got a couple Criterion movies. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. I released part 1 of this holiday Blu-ray haul a few days ago, and now it's time for part 2. While part 1 had a mix of standard releases, this second part is going to consist exclusively of Criterion Collection movies. With only a few exceptions, I almost always get my Criterions during half-off sales, since they're so much more expensive than regular Blu-rays. Sometimes that means Criterion's own flash sales, but my go-to is Barnes & Noble's biannual Criterion sale. They hold one every April and November, but I actually haven't gotten anything through them in probably 2 years, so I was overdue. With that in mind, I have a lot of movies to include in this second part of the haul. Like with part 1, this is a mix of movies that I got during sales at the end of the year or received for Christmas, and is entirely made up of Blu-rays with one DVD exception. I have seen quite a few of these, but the majority are actually movies I've never seen, so that's kind of exciting. Some are ones I've wanted to watch for a long time, and others are ones I'd either never heard of or only been vaguely aware of. The Criterion Collection's pretty good for that. So I'm going to go through these in alphabetical order rather than by spine number. Now, I know that might be painful to some Criterion fans, but I think alphabetical is just a little easier in a video like this. If you're interested in getting any of these movies yourself, I do have affiliate links to almost all of them in the description below. I do get a small commission from anything you buy using one of those links, so I'd appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. Okay, so we're going to start this off with a good one. Since we're going alphabetically, we've got 100 Years of Olympic Films. So this is a bit of a brick of a box set, but this contains 53 movies, actually, 53 documentaries around surrounding the Olympic Games. This is spine number 900 and covers Olympics, I believe, 41 Olympic Games, both winter and summer, between 1912 and 2012. So there's a lot to this one. Like I said, 53 movies in this, and I'm excited to eventually jump into this and start going through these. Okay, so next up we have A Matter of Life and Death. So this is spine number 939. This is one that I've not seen, but it's directed by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, who put out a lot of movies together. And I know this is supposed to be sort of a romance, fantasy, kind of war movie. It sounded really interesting, so I'm happy to have it. Next up is another one that I haven't seen, and one that I've heard quite a bit about and really need to see. Has been on my watch list for a long time, and that's A Raisin in the Sun. So this is spine number 945, and this is a Sidney Poitier movie. I really like him, but this is somehow a movie that I've not seen yet. I know it's adapted from a play, and it's kind of this drama about a family, and I'm really interested in finally checking this one out. Another one I've not seen, another one that I've heard about so much, is All About Eve. So this is spine number 1003. And like I said, this is kind of a long time coming to finally watch this. This is kind of a backstage story with Bette Davis as kind of this wannabe actress. And it sounds really interesting, but kind of has this air about it that I've heard about, and I'm curious to see if it ends up being like my expectations of it. Another one that I've heard about a lot but have not got around to seeing is All That Jazz. So this is spine number 724. This is another one that's kind of like a backstage story, kind of like All About Eve, except instead of an actress, we've got a guy who's a director of films, but also a choreographer for musicals. And so it's supposed to be kind of semi-autobiographical by the director Bob Fosse here, and I'm curious to see what this one's all about as well. Okay, next we have Barry Lyndon. So this is a Stanley Kubrick movie. This is spine number 897. And so I have very mixed opinions of Stanley Kubrick movies. The Shining I absolutely love. Most of his other movies are a little underwhelming to me. This one I've heard a lot about. I've heard it's pretty extravagant, especially with the costumes, but in general, these types of movies aren't my favorites, so not my favorite genre by not my favorite director. We'll see, but I am curious. It's one of the last Stanley Kubrick movies I haven't seen, so I wanted to be able to check it out. Okay, next up is one that I only became recently aware of, and that's Betty Blue. So this is Spy number 1002, so this is a pretty recent release. And it's a French movie, and it's kind of this romance, but there's this woman who's kind of unhinged almost, or kind of unbalanced, and it's kind of her descent into this and what she does with this other guy who kind of gets wrapped up in this situation with her. So sounded kind of interesting. And again, I've never seen it, never heard of it before Criterion announced it, so I wanted to check this one out. Okay, so next up is one that I actually have seen, and that's Black Orpheus, or Orfeo Negro. And so this is an earlier Spine 48, and this movie was one that I did not expect to like nearly as much as I actually did. It's kind of this is from 1959, so at the time it was sort of a modern day retelling of the Greek myth of Orpheus, but set during Carnival in Rio de Janeiro. And so it's a very musical, kind of bossa nova sort of style movie, and again, not one that I expected to like, but I actually kind of enjoyed it. And it's really interesting because last year there was a kind of short film, or it's about 50 minutes long movie that came out on Amazon Prime called Guava Island, which was a Childish Gambino kind of produced and starred movie, and that definitely took some major inspiration from Black Orpheus. So that was kind of interesting and kind of reignited my desire to actually get this movie on Blu-ray. Next up is one that I should have seen a long time ago, haven't yet, and that's the original Blob. So this is the Blob from 1958. This was Steve McQueen's first acting role as Steve McQueen. He was acted a few times under his given name before then, but this is Spy number 91, kind of a cult horror movie that I really need to finally watch. Next up is another one that I actually have seen, and that is Blue Velvet. So this is Spine number 977, and this is directed by David Lynch. And I'm not a huge fan of David Lynch. I've seen a lot of his movies now. I've seen Twin Peaks, obviously, and I just have never really connected with his style. He's got a very unique style, very weird movies and weird sensibilities with his work. But Blue Velvet was one that I saw. I've only seen it once, but I saw it before I knew just how weird David Lynch was. So I was kind of disappointed by it, that first time, but I really think that if I rewatch it now, knowing what kind of Lynch is all about, I think this is one of his more accessible movies. So I'm curious to give this one another shot and see Dennis Hopper's crazy performance. Okay, so next up is another movie that I have seen, but I haven't seen it in a super long time. So that's Bowling for Columbine. This is Spy number 928, and this was Michael Moore's documentary about the Columbine shooting, as well as kind of gun related stuff surrounding that. This came out in 2002, so only a few years after the shooting occurred. And I didn't see this in theaters, but I did see it shortly afterwards. And I'm really kind of curious to come back to it, especially given kind of how relevant the topic still is. Next, we've got a movie that I have seen plenty of times, and that's The Breakfast Club. So this is Spy number 905. This is one that I have seen a lot of times, and I actually already own this Blu-ray in kind of a more standard release, the 30th anniversary edition, I believe. So this is John Hughes's classic kind of teenage comedy that has a lot more to say than you might expect on surface level. So this is a good one. I was really surprised that Criterion decided to include this one, but I'm glad because they always put out some really great special features and commentaries and other stuff that I'm excited to check out. Next, we've got back to some movies that I haven't seen, and so we've got Breathless. So this is Jean-Luc Godard, and this is Spy number 408. So this is one that I've heard about a lot, but not anything specific, just that it's really good. So I know it's kind of this crime drama. It's a French movie about sort of a car theft gone wrong and some interesting things that ensue after that. So really curious to check this one out. Next up, we've got another movie I haven't seen yet, and that's The Bridge. So this is a German movie, spy number 763. And so this is kind of an anti-war movie. This came out in the late 50s, I think 1959, yes. So 1959, and it's set at kind of the tail end of World War II, and it's about these teenagers in Germany who kind of get enlisted to sort of defend this bridge, and they're not soldiers, right? They kind of just got plucked out of school, and now it's kind of about them and dealing with that and dealing with war. So sounded kind of interesting and sounded like it could be a kind of powerful movie. So I was curious to check that one out. Okay, so next up, we've got Broadcast News. So this is Spine 552, and this is a movie that I had never even heard of before seeing it in the Criterion Collection. And so I'm really curious to check this one out. It sounds like it could be really good. It's got a stacked cast. We've got Holly Hunter, Albert Brooks, William Hurt. But it's kind of like a satire, sort of comedy about TV news and broadcast. So sounded like it could be pretty interesting. Next, we've got one that I have seen and I already own a copy of, so now this is a Criterion replacement, and that's Bull Durham. So it's a Spine 936. And so this is a romantic comedy, sort of sports drama, sports story. And it's about a minor league baseball team and kind of this woman who's sort of a groupie to that team. And so that is Susan Sarandon. And she kind of takes a new player under her wing, so to speak, every year. And so that's Tim Robbins. But her previous player, Kevin Costner's character, kind of there's some jealousy there and some things ensue. So this was one that I like, but I don't like as much as some other people do, and I was really, really surprised that this made it into the Criterion Collection, but again, another nice Criterion replacement for Blu-ray that I already have. Okay, so this next one. This one is a Blu-ray I've been looking for a very long time, and that's Chungking Express. So this is Spine 453. This is a movie that is out of print, and this is a movie that I have heard so many good things about for a very, very long time. So this is a Wong Kar-wai movie, and it's like a sort of, it's hard to describe. It's supposed to be sort of a romantic, sort of comedy, drama, this like interweaving of stories kind of thing. I'm really, really interested in finally seeing this. So happy to have this Blu-ray. Another one that I am happy to have, sticking together. Another one I'm happy to have is the complete Monterey Pop Festival. So this is a box set. There's actually 3 movies in this. So the box set is Spine number 167, but it contains 2 other Spine numbers within it. So there is Monterey Pop, just as a documentary, which is Spine 168, and then there are 2 other documentaries. So we've got Jimmy Plays Monterey and Shake Otis at Monterey, which are combined Spine number 169. And so if you saw my part 1 of this haul video, you saw that I got Woodstock, and I was really excited about that. And so while I had seen Woodstock, I have not seen Monterey Pop Festival. So I'm really interested, really curious. It's got some great people and great bands and artists in it. We've got The Who, we've got Jimi Hendrix, we've got Janis Joplin, the Mamas and the Papas, the Byrds, Otis Redding. And lots more. There's special features on here that says there's like 3 hours of extra artists and bands that weren't even shown in the original documentary. So really excited and curious to check this one out. Next up, we've got Culdesac, which is a Roman Polanski film from the late 60s. And so we've got Spine number 577 here. I don't know too much about this. Other than that, it's kind of like a home invasion story, but ends up being something else once the home invasion occurs. I don't know. It sounds kind of interesting, though, so I was curious to check it out, so I picked it up. So next up, we've got another box set here, and this is David Lean Directs Noel Coward. So there are 4 movies within this. Again, this is one where the box set has its own spine number, that's 603, and then each of the 4 movies in here, so we've got 604, 605, 606, and then 76. So the 4 movies contained within this are In Which We Serve, This Happy Breed, Blithe Spirit, and Brief Encounter. And I have seen 2 of these 4 movies. I've seen Blithe Spirit and Brief Encounter, and I really, really enjoyed both of them. They were both complete surprises. I had heard of neither of them when I first watched them. Blithe Spirit is kind of this weird, sort of wacky ghost story, seance kind of comedy. It's very hard to describe, but it was pretty fun and kind of has some interesting special effects for the time, because these are all from the 40s. Blithe Spirit was 45. And Brief Encounter is a really great romance that's kind of this, it goes in unexpected directions, but it's very mellow, not a whole ton of things going on, not a whole ton of different sets, but it's a really good movie. So I really wanted to check out these other 2 movies as well as own those 2 movies that I already liked. Next up's another one that I have seen, and that's Day for Night. So this is Francois Truffaut, spine number 769. And this is one of those movies about making movies. And Truffaut actually stars in this movie as a director, not as himself exactly, but it's pretty much him. And it's kind of his, the story of him and kind of how he's interacting with all this drama with his actors and kind of everything that goes into making a movie. And so this was one that was pretty interesting to me, and so I was glad that I could pick this one up too. Next is a movie that I've heard a lot about, and I'm kind of disappointed in myself that I haven't seen it yet, and that's Death by Hanging. So this is a Japanese film, spine 798, and so it's kind of a satire, and so basically in this movie there's a guy who's been sentenced to death, but he survives his execution, and then there's all this kind of drama and confusion about what to do with him now that he survived. Do they still kill him? Do they do it the same way? What's going to happen? And so it's sort of a dark comedy, but it's meaningful, so it's more satirical than anything else, but sounds really interesting, really curious to check it out. So here we've got another pretty big movie, or more of mini-series actually, and that's Decalogue. So this is a Polish movie, or kind of, like I said, a mini-series. It was originally aired on TV as 10 hour-long episodes. So this is spine number 837. And basically this is supposed to be about the 10 Commandments, and kind of films talking about or dealing with themes of each of them. This isn't one that I had planned to get anytime soon, but I did get this one as a gift, so I'm kind of curious to see what this is actually about, because this is quite an endeavor to actually watch. Like I said, it's like 10 hours of film here, but I will see what it's like. Next up, kind of going the opposite direction, a very, very short movie. This one's barely over an hour, and that's Detour. So this is spine 966, and this is sort of a film noir crime movie. Deals with hitchhikers, and it sounded very, very interesting. Haven't heard much talk of this movie ever before, but I wanted to pick it up because it sounded really good. Next, we've got another box set. And this is Dietrich von Sternberg in Hollywood. So this is a 6-movie collection. So again, the whole set has a spine number, that's 930, and then it has 931 through 935, as well as spine number 109 in there. So the movies in this collection are Morocco, Dishonored, Shanghai Express, Blonde Venus, The Scarlet Empress, and The Devil is a Woman. Of these, I've seen one. I've seen Shanghai Express, and that was really surprising and very good. So these are all pretty early. These are all from the early 30s, but it's a really interesting, at least Shanghai Express was a really interesting story and kind of this femme fatale sort of thing, and I liked it, so I wanted to check out the other movies in this set. Next up, we've got another movie that has been on my watch list for a very long time that I have not gotten around to for some reason, and that's Do the Right Thing. So a Spike Lee joint, right? So a Spike Lee directed movie, Spy number 97, so it's one of the earlier ones. And so I know this is about kind of a lot of people in a Brooklyn neighborhood, and that it's, a very charged environment, right? Lots of racial tension, and that there's a lot going on that is kind of a drama, but that it's supposed to have comedic elements too, and so I've really wanted to watch this one for a long time, so glad I finally have it. Next up is Down by Law. So this is Spine number 166, and this is a Jim Jarmusch movie. And I don't know about Jim Jarmusch. I have very mixed feelings on his movies. I haven't seen a ton of them. I've seen a few, including The Dead Don't Die, which was one that he just put out last year, which was okay, kind of a weird take on a zombie movie, zombie art house. But this one is supposed to be sort of a, these three guys that meet in prison and then they go out and do stuff together, and it's in black and white despite the fact that it was released in 1986, and it's just, I'm expecting a very strange movie, but from a premise standpoint it sounded slightly more interesting to me than some of his other movies, plus it's in the Criterion Collection, so I figured why not, I'll give it a shot. Next up is one that I had not heard of at all before somebody recommended it to me. So this is El Sur. So 927 for the spy number. This is a Spanish movie, and I honestly don't really know much of anything about this. This is a movie I picked up purely on the recommendation of actually another YouTuber, our kind of resident Criterion Collection expert, Daisuke Beppu. So if you haven't checked out any of his stuff before, and you're interested in Criterion, you probably already know him if you are, but if you haven't seen him, definitely go check out Daisuke's channel. I'll put a link down in the description. This is one he talked very, very highly of, and so I wanted to pick it up because I trust Daisuke's his recommendations quite a bit. So next we've got Election. So this is Spy number 904. And this is a more recent movie. This is directed by Alexander Payne, who's put out quite a few movies that I like for the most part. This was 1999. And so this is about a high school election, like a high school presidential race. But it's more of a satire of both high school life and then politics and kind of running for office. And so this stars Reese Witherspoon as kind of the high schooler that's trying to get elected, and then Matthew Broderick as a teacher that's trying to kind of sabotage her campaign. So it sounds interesting. I've heard about this one, kind of surprised it's in Criterion, but wanted to check it out. Next up, we've got Elevator to the Gallows. So this is Spine 335, and this is a French movie, kind of a French crime film, but what I knew this for before ever really knowing it was a movie was Miles Davis's score for this movie. So this has a very jazzy score, and so I was aware of that before really aware of the movie itself, but the movie sounds really interesting too, so I wanted to pick this one up. Okay, so next up is The Executioner. This is a Spanish movie, so it's also known as El Verdugo. This is Spine 840. And I'll be honest that I was only first interested in this movie because of this poster art, because of this cover art here. It's so strange, but so weird and interesting. I don't know. But then I looked into the plot, or at least kind of a brief synopsis, and it sounds equally as interesting as its cover art. So this is like a really dark comedy, like a pitch black comedy. It's sort of a romance, and it seems very wacky and strange, and so I wanted to check it out. Next up is a movie that I've heard about for a very long time, has been on my watch list for a very long time, and that's Eyes Without a Face. And so this is Spine 260, and this is a French movie, and it's kind of like a thriller, psychological horror movie. That sounds really interesting. I don't know too much about the plot. You probably noticed I try to avoid kind of major things about plots of movies that I haven't seen yet. But this is one that I've been wanting to check out for a long time, so I'm glad I finally got a copy. Next up is Fists in the Pocket. So this is Spine number 333, and it's an Italian movie. And this one is one that I had not heard of at all before seeing that it was in the Criterion Collection, but the really brief synopsis blurb made it sound super interesting, that there's like this dysfunctional family, and then this guy decides to take matters into his own hands and kind of make a big change for his siblings and himself. So it sounds really intense, sounds really different from other movies, so I wanted to pick this one up. Next up is a movie that has been on my watch list for a very long time, and that's Funny Games. So this is the original German Funny Games, the one from 1997. This was remade, an English remake, by the same director only a few years after, and I haven't seen that remake either, but this is Spine number 975, and this is like a home invasion thriller, and it's one that I wanted to see for a while. Okay, so this next one, this is kind of the big one in terms of size, but also in terms of kind of importance and significance within the Criterion Collection. So this is Spine number 1000, and that is the Godzilla collection. So this is Godzilla, the Showa era films, 1954 to 1975. So as you can see, this is a very different style in terms of the actual release here for Criterion. There are 15 movies in here, ranging from the original 1954 Godzilla all the way through the 1975 Terror of Mechagodzilla. And so I have a confession. I have never seen any of the original Godzilla movies. I have intended to for so long, especially the first one, right, Godzilla. I have no excuse. I don't know why I haven't seen it up to this point, but when this was announced as 1000, I knew I had to get it, not only for the significance of Spine number 1000, but also for the movies contained within it too. And I have no idea what I'm going to actually do with this, because this is far too large to fit on any of my shelves, so I got to figure out a way to actually, to display or at least have this one so I can get at these movies, but Spine number 1000, so this is very exciting. Alright, so next we've got a movie that I have seen before. I've seen quite a bit actually, and I already own a copy of this movie, but now I have the Criterion version of Mike Nichols's The Graduate. So this is Spine number 800. And this is a movie that I really enjoy, and it's one of those kinds of movies that sort of, as you age and kind of watch this at different periods in your life, you connect with different elements of it, and so that's pretty cool. Plus, it has a great soundtrack by Simon and Garfunkel, including the awesome song Mrs. Robinson. So happy that Criterion has released that. Next up is a movie that I have seen before, and that is The Great Dictator. So this is Spine number 565, and this is a Charlie Chaplin movie, and it's a satirical comedy in which he plays a dual role as kind of this fascist dictator named Adenoid Hinkle, obviously modeled after Adolf Hitler, and then he also plays a Jewish barber, and so it's kind of this. It's a satire, and it's really poking fun at Hitler and at Nazi Germany, but it's a really interesting movie, especially given the fact that this came out in 1940, so this was while World War II was still going on. So happy to have this one, and you can see it you can flip it over and they have the name that way, and you can see him as Adenoid Hinkle or as the barber that way. Okay, next up is a movie that I've not seen, and that's Heaven Can Wait. So this is the Heaven Can Wait from 1943, which actually bears no connection to the Heaven Can Wait that came out in the late 70s. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit, because there's kind of an interesting thing here in a second. But anyway, this is Spine number 291. And this has Don Amici as basically this guy who dies, and he's like at the gates of hell, and the devil's like, I don't know if you really deserve to be in here. And so now this guy goes on to tell his life story about all these terrible things he's done and why he deserves to be in hell. Sounded interesting, so I wanted to pick it up. And so I mentioned that there was no connection to the 70s Heaven Can Wait with this movie, but there is a connection with this next movie here, which is Here Comes Mr. Jordan. So this was the one that actually got remade into Heaven Can Wait from 1978, I believe. But anyway, Here Comes Mr. Jordan. I have seen this one. I really enjoyed it. Spy number 819. And basically, there's this guy, a boxer, who dies. And they determine, or the angels or kind of guys in charge of heaven determine that they actually made a mistake and they weren't trying to take him, and now his soul kind of gets put into this other guy's body, who hasn't lived a great life, and it's kind of an interesting story that way. So Here Comes Mr. Jordan. Really glad to have this one on Blu-ray. Next up is High and Low, which is an Akira Kurosawa movie, so Japanese film, early spy number 24. And this one is sounds really interesting. It's kind of this drama, police procedural crime sort of thriller movie that sounded really interesting. Very different from the other Kurosawa movies that I have seen. Most have been kind of samurai based, and this doesn't seem to be like that. So I'm really curious and excited to check this one out. Next up is Holiday. This is a movie that has been on my watch list for a very long time. Haven't gotten around to it yet for some reason, but now I have the Criterion, so I can. So this is a very new release. It's spy number 1009. And so this stars Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant, and it's sort of this romantic comedy. Heard a lot about it. Really curious to see if it kind of lives up to my expectations of it. Next up is Hopscotch. So this is a Walter Matthau movie. It's by number 163. And this is a comedic spy thriller. And it seems kind of crazy. Seems sort of similar in style to maybe Charade, which was another Criterion movie actually that I really enjoy. And so I wanted to give this one a shot because it sounded really interesting. So next up, we've got a bit more solemn of a movie, and that is Hunger. So this is directed by Steve McQueen, and it's spy number 504, and stars Michael Fassbender as this IRA prisoner who goes on a hunger strike. And this was actually the first Criterion movie I was ever aware of. So I haven't seen it, but a friend of mine who collected Blu-rays before I ever did and kind of introduced me to Blu-rays and to the Criterion Collection. This was the first Criterion he ever mentioned and kind of showed me the actual Criterion. And I've had this in the back of my mind for a long time. Even though it's not a movie that I think is going to be an enjoyable watch by any means, I'm glad to have this because it's kind of, this is the start of Criterion for me, or start of my knowledge of Criterion. Next up is a newer movie, and that's I, Daniel Blake. So this is spy number 906, but by newer I mean newer in terms of when the movie itself came out, and that was 2016. And so this was the 2016 Palme d'Or winner. And so this seems to be kind of reserved drama, maybe, where there's this kind of unlikely friendship that develops between two people, this guy and then this woman who I believe has kids, but sounded kind of interesting, and it's sort of uncommon to get such recent movies into the Criterion Collection, so that kind of piqued my interest too. Next up is I Married a Witch. So this is spy number 676. And this one, it's pretty short. It's only 77 minutes, but it's supposed to be like a supernatural sort of screwball comedy about sort of this curse that was placed on this guy's family after the witch trials, and how this curse has been passed down through generations eventually to him. I'm not a huge fan of screwball comedies. They're kind of just okay to me typically, so I don't know how much I'll end up enjoying this, but the premise sounds kind of interesting and unique, so I wanted to check it out. Next up is I Want to Hold Your Hand. So this is Spine number 967, and it's directed by Robert Zemeckis. And basically, it's about these teenagers who go on kind of a road trip to go meet the Beatles when they first come to America. This is one that I had heard of, but I haven't heard much about. Nobody ever seems to really talk about this one. And it sounds kind of right up my alley, so I don't know if it'll end up being something I really enjoy, but at least it sounds like it should be. So I've got it to check it out. Next up, we've got another Kurosawa movie, and this is Ikiru. So Spy number 221. And this is one that has been on my watch list for a very long time, too. This is one of Kurosawa's kind of biggest films, not in terms of production or necessarily story, but in terms of kind of importance and significance to film. And it seems to be about this guy who's dying, I believe, of cancer, and he kind of decides he wants to make things better for other people. So he uses his remaining time to kind of bring happiness and joy to others. So it sounds like a really powerful movie and one that I've wanted to check out for a long time. Next up is another one I've heard about quite a bit, and that's Il Sorpasso. And so this is an Italian movie. This is Spine 707. And this is supposed to be kind of a road trip comedy. This is the dual format edition, so it's got DVD and Blu-ray in here. But basically it's these two guys who didn't know each other before deciding to take this road trip, but they go across Italy together. And so sounds like it might be a little meandering, but I think I'm gonna enjoy this one. I hope. Next up is a little bit different turn of genre, and that's In a Lonely Place. So this is Spine 810, and this is sort of a mystery drama. I have not seen this one. It stars Humphrey Bogart, but it seems to be like a really intense, kind of dark, draining movie, but sounded really good, and I was recommended this movie by somebody, so I wanted to check it out. Next up is The Innocents. So this is Spine 727. This is one that I have had on a watch list for a long time before I ever even realized it was in the Criterion Collection. And this is basically a psychological horror movie about this woman who decides to, or gets hired to be kind of the governess for these kids. And then it turns out these kids are like, there's some creepy stuff going on with them. So it's kind of a horror movie that sounds reminiscent of many, many movies since, but this is an early one, 1961. So I'm really interested in this to see if it's the inspiration for so many other movies that I think it actually is. Speaking of inspiration for other movies, we've got The Island of Lost Souls. So this is Spine number 586. This is a movie that I have not seen somehow, but this is based off of H.G. Wells's The Island of Dr. Moreau, and I have seen the 1977 remake, The Island of Dr. Moreau, and I actually have a review up for that one on this channel. But this is like a horror classic kind of mad scientist movie, so I really wanted to finally check this one out. Okay, next up we've got another pretty large box set here. Large in terms of the number of movies in it, but also in terms of the size of the collection. And that is the Essential Jacques Demy. And so this is a set of 6 French movies. So like a lot of the other box sets we've talked about already, the collection itself has a spine number, and that's 713. And then the movies within it are numbers 714 through 719. Kind of a cool setup here with the colors. But the movies in this collection are Lola, Bay of Angels, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, The Young Girls of Roquefort, Donkey Skin, and Un Chambre en Ville. So the only one that I've seen in this collection is The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. And that was a movie kind of like Black Orpheus, where I did not expect to like it at all. And by any normal, measure for me, I should not like this movie, but I actually do. And it's a musical, but not only is it a musical, but it's one of those musicals where they sing literally every line of dialogue. And normally that kind of thing is like torture to me. But for some reason, I liked that one. And it was colorful, and the story was interesting, and it was good. And so I was really curious to see some more Demy movies. So I wanted to pick up this box set. So next up is another French movie. And this one's got quite the name. So this is Jeanne Dielman, 23, Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles. So 484 for the spine number. And this is a movie that I have known about, been aware of, and have heard lots of good things about, but has never sounded interesting to me in the least. Because it's about this like kind of middle-aged widow, and it's just her daily routine. But somehow this is supposed to be a fantastic movie, and this is another one that, like I said, a lot of people have talked about, but that Dice K actually kind of put me over the edge on and finally convinced me to pick up. So we'll see. We'll see if I end up liking it. Next up is another noir movie, and this is Robert Aldrich's Kiss Me Deadly, which is spine 568. So this is kind of the second hitchhiker-based film noir movie that we've talked about today, but it sounds really interesting. And Robert Aldrich he later directed Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, which is one of my favorite kind of thriller movies from the 60s, so I'm really curious to see this one too. Next up is a movie I have seen, and that is Klute. So Klute is spine number 987. And this is kind of this crime thriller, missing persons kind of movie. Stars Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland. And this is just one that I enjoyed, but I wasn't in the right mindset when I saw it the first time, so I'm really curious to see if I end up liking this a little bit more, because this is the kind of movie that I think I should love, but I only liked. So I wanna rewatch this one. So next up is another Japanese film, and this is Kurenai Co. And so this is spine number 584, and this was supposed to be a horror movie, but more of like a supernatural horror movie. I guess it's based on kind of a folk tale or a fable, and it sounds really interesting. So I've been kind of eyeing this Criterion for a long time, really since I started collecting Criterion movies, but for some reason I haven't picked it up till now. Next up is Federico Fellini's La Dolce Vita. And this is spine number 733. This is a movie that I've heard about for years. It's on like lots of top lists, especially of Italian movies. And for some reason, I haven't seen this one. And I have no explanation and no excuse for it. But this one's supposed to be kind of a comedy drama, sort of slice of life kind of thing about this reporter and his time in Rome, and sort of looking at high society in Rome at the time, and so I finally picked it up, so I can finally check that one out. So next we got Le Cercle Rouge. This is spine number 218, and this is another one that I am really excited to actually own, because this is another out-of-print Criterion movie. And so this is this kind of French crime drama heist movie that sounds really interesting. And so this is Jean-Pierre Melville who directed it, and he actually directed this next one too, and that's Les Samurai, which is another crime movie, another French crime movie. This is spine number 306, and this one's more about this guy who's sort of this contract killer, this cool guy that sort of has this samurai aesthetic to him, I guess, somehow, but another Jean-Pierre Melville movie that I've been kind of having my eye on for quite a while. Next up is Lost in America. So this is a movie that was both starring but also directed by Albert Brooks. This is spine number 887, and this one's supposed to be kind of a satire, but like a road trip comedy about this guy and his wife who set to driving around America. So don't really know too much about the plot itself, but sort of sounded interesting, so I wanted to check that out. Another one that I had heard nothing about but sounded really interesting was The Lure. So this is 896. This is another movie that came out fairly recently. This is from 2015, and it's a Polish movie, but it's supposed to be like this horror musical about these like vicious mermaids. I don't really know too much about the plot because I didn't want to get into it, but it sounded creepy and interesting, and I had never heard anybody else talk about it, so I wanted to check it out. Next up is Medium Cool. So this is Spine number 658. And this is basically this movie that's a fictional movie, but that interweaves actual footage and kind of is shot in a documentary style. So I think a lot of people thought this was just a straight up documentary, but basically it's about this news guy, this news cameraman, and his coverage of the riots around the 1968 Democratic National Convention. So sounded very, very interesting, and it's one that I've heard the name of quite a bit, but never really knew what it was about, so sounds compelling. Next up is Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. This is another movie that I've heard talk of quite a bit, but never knew really what the plot was about. So this is Spine number 535. And this is a World War II drama about this guy here, which is David Bowie, and his character is a prisoner of war. Again, World War II, so he's in Japan. And basically, it's sort of this culture clash thing between him and his captors, and then another British military guy who's there, Mr. Lawrence. So I still don't know too much about the plot, but I've heard that this is a very, very good movie. Next up is a movie that I intended to see a really long time ago, and that's Midnight Cowboy. So this is pretty newly included in the Criterion Collection. It's Spine 925, but I don't know why I hadn't seen this one. I've heard so much about it. I know it won Best Picture. It's the only, or at least at the time, it was the first X-rated movie to ever get to win Best Picture at the Oscars. So Dustin Hoffman, Jon Voight, really need to finally watch this one. Next up is the only DVD in this haul, and that's Mon Oncle. And that is Spine number 111. This is a Jacques Tati movie, and I haven't seen any of his films, I believe. And so this is one that I had heard a lot about, and I missed seeing a showing of this at the Indie Theater near me last year. They were playing this, and I wasn't able to get down. It's quite a drive to get there, but I had intended to. Missed it. This is not out on just Blu-ray separately. It's only included as part of Jacques Tati box set, which I at the time I didn't think I really wanted, but you'll see that I've got another film of his here too, which I think's in that box set, so I probably should have just gone the box set route, but we got the DVD, which who knows, maybe at some point I'll replace with that Blu-ray box set. Next up is The Naked Prey. So this is Spine number 415, came out in the mid-late 60s, and is basically a thriller, kind of action thriller movie about these guys that go to Africa to hunt big game. It's like this hunting party they go on, but they become the hunted. And so I've heard talk of this movie quite a bit, and I, for some reason, didn't realize it was Criterion Collection until recently, so I wanted to pick that one up. Next up is The Night of the Hunter. So this is Spy number 541. And this seems to be a really dark story. So Robert Mitchum stars as kind of the serial killer preacher. And so it's this like crime drama thing. I don't really know too much about it, but it sounds intense. So the Night of the Hunter. Next up is another night-related movie, and that's Night Train to Munich. So this is one that I've had my eye on for a really long time. The premise has always kind of sounded like a Hitchcock-type movie to me. This is Spy number 528, directed by Carol Reed, who has a lot of other really good movies, including some that are in the Criterion Collection. But this is a British thriller, and again, one that I've wanted to see for a very long time. So, speaking of thrillers and of movies I haven't seen and wanted to, and of Hitchcock, we've got Notorious by Alfred Hitchcock. So, this is by number 137, and this is a movie that for some reason I haven't seen yet. I love Hitchcock. I've seen so many of his films, I have so many of his films, but I've never gotten around to watching this one. So now I can, and this stars Cary Grant, and this was, I think, one of 4 Hitchcock movies he was in. So I'm hopeful that I enjoy this one like I do pretty much every other Hitchcock movie. Speaking of Cary Grant, we've got another movie of his, and that's The Philadelphia Story. And so this stars Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn, and Jimmy Stewart, another Hitchcock alum. And so this is spy number 901. And this is kind of this comedy of manners movie, and so I have not seen The Philadelphia Story, but I have seen the sort of musical remake called High Society that came out in the 50s, and I actually thought that was okay, so I'm kind of hopeful that I'm actually going to really enjoy the non-musical version. Next up is The Piano Teacher. So this is a French movie, spy number 894. I've heard a lot about this movie, not anything specific plot-wise, but just in general. And so this is a drama about this woman who's like a piano teacher, but she kind of has this secret aspect of her life, or kind of the second side of her, and it sounds interesting, sounds pretty compelling, so I wanted to check that one out. So next up we've got Payroll Lefou, which is spy number 421. So this is, I believe, the second Jean-Luc Godard movie that's in this haul. And this is another movie that I'm really happy to have my hands on because this is out of print. And so I don't know too much about the plot here, other than that it's kind of this road trip crime spree kind of movie that sounds really interesting. So I'm happy to have this one. Next up is another Jacques Tati movie, Playtime, another one, like I said, that I think is in that box set Blu-ray collection, but we'll see. So I have, this is spy number 112, so another French film, and it seems kind of interesting, because basically it's about these two people who kind of are unaware of technology or kind of technological advancements, so it's kind of this comedy of errors about them with technology, it seems. So we'll see. Next up is a movie that I have seen, and that is The Princess Bride. So this is spy number 948. And this is one that I'm really surprised made it into the Criterion Collection, especially given its popularity with just kind of general audiences. Usually Criterion brings us kind of unknown movies or lesser known movies. But we got The Princess Bride here, and it's a pretty unique release here for Criterion. It's set up like a storybook and kind of has this fabric kind of texture to it. And so, well, I don't know. We'll see. This is a movie that I do already own, but now I've got the Criterion release. Next, we've got Red River, which is a Howard Hawks Western. It's spy number 709, and it actually includes not only Red River, but also a second film called Blazing Guns on the Chisholm Trail. And so this is a John Wayne Western, and in general, I like Westerns. I'm not huge on them, but there are some that I really, really enjoy. But it's kind of, you're hard-pressed not to at least sort of enjoy a John Wayne performance in a Western. So I'm glad I've picked up yet another Criterion Western film. Next up is Seconds. So this is spine 667. This is a movie that I had not heard anything about, but it sounds really interesting. It's kind of the sci-fi movie about, people basically getting a new life by having their body and their face changed, and they get to become a whole different person. So it sounded kind of interesting and sort of like a potentially creepy but cool sci-fi film. So next up is Sex, Lies, and Videotape. So this is a movie that I do own already, but now I've got the Criterion release. And this was Steven Soderbergh's debut film. So this is spy number 938. And this is a movie that is very strange, especially if you kind of go into it the first time, like not knowing what to expect. It wasn't what I anticipated it to be, and it's definitely not what you would anticipate it based on its title. But it was kind of compelling. It was good, and James Spader's in it, and I really like James Spader, so I wanted to pick up the Criterion edition. Next up is Shallow Grave. So this is Spine 616. And speaking of debut films, this is Danny Boyle's debut film. And so this seems like a really kind of crazy and out there crime thriller. I don't know too much about it. Haven't heard much talk of it, but I wanted to check it out. Okay, so this next one is one that I've heard a lot about, and that is Showa. So this is Spine number 663. And this is a documentary about the Holocaust. This is an incredibly long movie, incredibly long documentary. And this is one that is unique in the fact that it does not use any archival footage. That it's all, at the time, which was the 80s, 85, at the time, contemporary interviews with people who were involved, who were either imprisoned or part of this event. And so this is one that, I'm not looking forward to watching, but that I've heard is an extremely, extremely powerful watch. So I'm glad I finally have this so I can check it out at some point. Next up is Sid and Nancy. So this is a very early Spine number 20. And so this is about Sid Vicious, who was the singer and guitarist of the Sex Pistols, and his girlfriend. And if you've watched even any of this video or anything else that I put out, you should probably know by now that I really like music. I'm really into especially rock, and so punk music is among the things that I enjoy. And so Sex Pistols are a band I like, and so this has been on my watch list well before I was ever even collecting Blu-rays, let alone Criterion movies. So I'm really happy to finally get a chance to check that one out. Next up is one of my favorite movies overall, like of all time, and that is The Silence of the Lambs. So this I've obviously seen, and I do own already, but now I've got the Criterion edition, which is Spine number 13, because this was back in the collection a long, long time ago, one of their first inclusions. And so what else can I say about this? This is fantastic. It's got awesome performances by Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter. It's a really interesting kind of procedural crime thriller, but also the psychological side of things. Really, really good movie. Really happy to have the Criterion release. Next up is Sisters, which is a Brian De Palma film. And this is Spine number 89. And this is one that I had not really heard of before kind of looking into Criterion films, but it sounds really interesting. It's kind of this crime horror slasher movie about these sisters who were at one point conjoined twins, but they've since been separated, and one is kind of accused of murder. So it sounds like there could be some interesting stuff going on there with the sister aspect. But we'll see. Next up is Richard Linklater's Slacker. So I have kind of mixed feelings on his films. In general, I enjoy them, but not typically as much as other people do. So I don't know how I'm gonna feel about this one exactly. I imagine it's gonna be pretty much along those same lines. So this is Spine 247. But I wanted to get it because I already do have a lot of his other films, so I wanted to add to my collection. Now we've got Smithereens. So this is Spine 941, and this is another movie kind of about the punk rock subculture. This time in New York City. And it's a fictional story. It's not based on anything kind of real like the Sid and Nancy story is, but sounded really interesting. Again, I like that kind of music. I like that kind of stuff, so I wanted to check this one out. Next up, we've got Some Like It Hot. So this is Spine number 950. This is a Billy Wilder comedy. I have seen this one. I already own it, and I enjoy it quite a bit. it's kind of ahead of its time, and definitely serves as inspiration for a lot of movies that have come out since. So I was surprised that Criterion kind of nabbed it for the collection, but I'm not displeased by that either. Next is The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. This is spy number 452. And this is kind of a Cold War spy thriller. And it's one that I don't know much about, but I've wanted to check out based on recommendation, so I wanted to pick that one up. Next is a movie that I kind of think I'm not going to like much, and that is Stalker. So this is Spine 888. This is an Andrei Tarkovsky movie, and I have not had the best of luck with his films. I either dislike them or just think they're okay, of the ones I've seen before. I have not seen Stalker. I've heard a lot about this film, but I don't know what to expect. I hope I like it. I'm going to go in with an open mind, but I'm a little hesitant about my enjoyment. Next, we've got another Japanese film. We've got Tampopo. This is spy number 200, no, not 200, spy number 868. Plastic's throwing me off. And this is a comedy about these people who decide to open up a noodle shop, and there's apparently all sorts of crazy stuff that goes on surrounding this noodle shop and food and all sorts of stuff. So, sounded kind of interesting. We'll see. Next up, we've got another debut film, this time from Michael Mann, and this is Thief, which is spy number 691. And so this is one that I don't know too much about, but I have heard talk of. And so I know it's kind of a crime thriller heist movie, but I don't know why I haven't seen this before and why I don't hear that many people talking about it. Again, it's one that the people who do talk about it seem to really enjoy it, but it's not a broadly recognized film. So I'm really curious to see what it's like. Okay, so next up is like my holy grail of Criterion movies. This is one that I have been searching for since the beginning of my Criterion collecting days, and that is The Third Man. This is another Carol Reed film, spy number 64, another out-of-print movie, but this is one that's like impossible to find. So I got this one as a Christmas present this year, and I am so happy, thrilled to have this one, because not only is it hard to find, again, Holy Grail Criterion release for me, but it's also a movie that I really like. And so it's another kind of sort of spy-ish movie. It's sort of a mystery noir, starring Joseph Cotton and Orson Welles. And so, finally have The Third Man Criterion release. Next up is Tokyo Drifter. So this is spy number 39, and this is a movie that I have been aware of for quite a while, but never really considered too much until recently. And so it's supposed to be this very stylish sort of Japanese gangster film or Yakuza film, and it's from the 60s, and so I'm really curious to see kind of that aesthetic in a movie from that time period. So I'm very curious. Next up is The Tree of Life by Terrence Malick. This is spy number 942, and this is another one of those movies that I don't know about. I don't know if I'm gonna like this or not. In general, Terrence Malick films are kind of just okay to me, and this is one that I've heard a lot of praise for, and so I'm definitely curious about it. And again, it made it into the Criterion Collection, but I don't know. Past experience with Malick's films hasn't been particularly promising for me. Next up is a French movie called La Vérité. This is spy number 960. I've not seen this one. I know it's supposed to be kind of this courtroom drama, or more of a courtroom melodrama, as this woman tries to plead her case. But this is directed by Henri-Georges Clouzot, who also directed Les Diaboliques, which is a movie, a Criterion release movie actually, that I really, really enjoy. I know this is very different from that story, but this is another one of those movies that Dice K actually recommended. So I'm curious to check this one out. I hope it's good. Next up, we've got The Virgin Suicides. So this is, once again, a debut film, this time for Sofia Coppola. This is Spy number 920. And I know that this is supposed to be kind of this mystery drama film. I've heard a ton about this, but have never watched it for some reason, so now I can. Next up is another Dice K recommendation, another Henri-Georges Clouzot film, and that's The Wages of Fear. So this is Spy number 36, and this one seems more like kind of Les Diaboliques in terms of the fact that it's like a thriller. But this time it's about these guys who are these truckers who are transporting some really flammable material down a really dangerous route. So it's supposed to be kind of this, anxiety-inducing thriller. So I'm really interested about that one. Next up is a documentary called The War Room. So this is Spy number 602, and this is a documentary that explores Bill Clinton's presidential run leading up to his eventual election in 1992. And so I've heard about this movie and heard that it kind of really changed the scope of political campaigns by kind of showing the things that goes on kind of on the backside of things. So I'm really, really curious to check this one out. It sounds really interesting. Next one is Woman in the Dunes. So this is a Japanese film, Spy number 394, and I don't know about this one. I've heard about this one. I know this was nominated for quite a few things in the year that it was, or the year after it was released, I guess technically, for the Oscars. And I don't know, it's like an art house film. It's supposed to be kind of new wave, and typically that kind of thing isn't something I really enjoy, but the plot does sound interesting, and for some reason it just kind of leapt out at me, so I want to give it a shot and check it out. Next up is Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. Spy number 855. So I have not seen this one, but it's another film by Pedro Almodovar, and I do have another Criterion release of his called Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down that I actually really enjoyed. It was very strange, very unexpected, but enjoyable in kind of a weird way. And so I imagine this one might be kind of along those lines of just strange but sort of enjoyable. So it's a Spanish film and just seems like it's going to be this crazy series of events. So I wanted to check this one out. Next we've got World on a Wire. So this is Spy number 598. And this is a German film, and kind of like Decalogue was actually released as a miniseries, a TV miniseries at the time in the 70s, 1973. I believe this was only a 2-part miniseries, though, rather than a 10-part one. But it sounds really interesting. It's kind of this sci-fi film that deals with like virtual reality and kind of some anomalies that are occurring in this sort of virtual reality space. So it sounds kind of cool, and I had never heard anybody talk about that one, so I'm really curious to check it out. And now we've got a box set here that has 2 films in it, both by Akira Kurosawa, so some more of his, and these are Spies number 52 and 53, so we've got Yojimbo and Sanjuro. So this is kind of a 2-pack of samurai films, which make up, I don't know if it really is the majority of his filmography, but at least the majority of my collection of his filmography up to this point are primarily samurai films. And this was kind of a gaping hole in that for me. I've heard really, really good things about these, been meaning to check them out for a long time, and so now I finally can. Alright, so that was part 2 of my 2019 holiday Blu-ray haul. Part 1, which was the non-Criterion half of the haul, is already available, so please give that one a watch too to see the other movies and TV shows I got. So, did you get any Criterions for the holidays? Seen any of the movies I got? Let me know your thoughts and all your pickups in the comments below. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insider information out of this haul video, I'd appreciate it if you hit that like button, and if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this, as well as movie reviews. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainely Movies, the way life should be.